Okay, welcome to another live stream from the iStill headquarters. And we're going to talk about gin today. We're doing a question and answers about gin. We want to answer all of your questions about gin. And I'm joined here today from iStill headquarters by Willem, our lab technician, and of course by Odin, our very own CEO and gin consultant. So Odin, why are we talking about gin today?
Well, I think primarily because you invited me to be here, but for any other reason, because gin is an amazing drink, right? I mean, it's been living a comeback for close to 10 years now, and I think, especially in Europe, it's been the driving force behind the resurrection of craft distilling in Europe. And you see the same happening in the USA, even though whiskey is probably more important there. You see that most distillers make gin, or, with all due respect, try to make gin. And I hope this Q&A will sort of help clarify things and teach people about do's and don'ts in order to make better product, in order to become more successful as a craft distiller.
Good, so we want to hear from you guys. Please put your questions into the live stream, into the chat at YouTube or into the chat at Facebook. The last time we did a live stream with Facebook, there was a little bit of a delay. So if there is a delay on Facebook, please switch to YouTube to watch us, but also you can still put your questions into the chat at Facebook. I will be reading all of them and we'll try to answer your questions. And in the meantime, of course, if there's no question coming in, there isn't any questions coming in at the moment, but what we're also doing, because we're making gin, we're going to show you guys how to do gin. If you want to see a whole recipe done from start to finish, we did that in the last live stream. You can watch it back, it's still online, but also we're making a gin today. And what we're doing, and that's why both guys are here with me, Willem is doing the recipe on the iStill Mini, our development still, and Odin is going to show you how to do the recipe on the bigger still, and we're using the iStill 100. Of course, we could have used the iStill 2000, that's behind me, but that would mean that the live stream would take about 8 to 10 hours, which is a little bit long, I think, a little bit of a stretch. So, let's make some gin.
Let's make some gin, okay. I'm totally ready to do that.
All right.
The iStill 100 is totally ready to do that. So
yes.
The way in which we like to make gin in the iStill 100, and we'll move over there in a minute, is basically by putting the herbs in the boiler. And we started preparing the iStill 100 by actually putting 60 liters of around 30% alcohol in the boiler, which is not a maximum fill because, well, as you should know, a 100 liter iStill basically can process 100 liters, right? So why 60 liters? Because things will go a little bit quicker when we do a slightly smaller run. So it will be more fun for you guys to actually see that. So what we did, we charged the boiler with 60 liters of 30%. We then added the juniper berries, and the reason we added those juniper berries is basically because juniper berries are quite hard. So if you give them a little bit longer maceration time before you start your run, maybe the night before, you actually get more juniper oils over. And if you get more juniper oils over, from that perspective, you can actually get more gin flavors over. But there's more to gin than just the juniper. So we've got the coriander here. All right, in a bag, because a bag makes it very easy to actually clean things. The moment that we put everything in the boiler, that's totally fine too. And cleaning probably won't be too difficult because there's the extra manhole, but still, in bags you just pull them out, you rinse the machine, you're done in a minute. So, this is a bag with coriander. There's already a bag of juniper in there, and these are the other herbs we're going to do today. So that's fun, right? I mean, first learning point, like there's a lot more coriander than there is total other herbs. And there's probably 2 to 3 times more juniper again than this. So basically, whenever you make a gin, juniper should be the biggest ingredient, and it is. Probably coriander the second, and then very quickly, all the other ingredients are relatively a smaller portion compared to the coriander or the juniper. And the way we add them is quite easy. Just open the bag, add them to it. Let's not forget to actually close the bag. Otherwise we'll still have to clean out afterwards. And make a little, what is it, loop, knot, so we can hang the gin bag from the gin hook that is actually in the iStill 100. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move over there, actually show you how the herbs are added into the boiler, and then I'm going to show you how the program actually runs on the iStill 100.
All right, and in the meantime, I can explain a little bit about the botanicals that we're using. We're not going to give you the exact amounts because we still think you should do that yourself. It's your gin if you're going to make a gin. But what we have in there, apart from the juniper berries and the coriander seed, is some orris, some anise seed, star anise actually, some licorice and some lemon peel. And to get a bit of a kick there, we have some timut pepper in there. And Odin is going to put it into the iStill 100 right now.
All right, well, this is how easy it is, right? iStill 100, the outlet tube, the cut points for heads, hearts and tails. We're doing the hearts in the stainless steel olive vessel, and we're doing the heads in a plastic little bucket. Quite easy. Open a manhole. Just put the herbs in. You find a gin hook and make sure it lashes on there. And the next thing you do is basically close the unit. And hand tight basically does it, right? So the next step I want to do is show you how the program works, right? So maybe we can zoom in a little bit. And maybe Sebastian can check if there's any questions coming in before.
Yeah, there's a question coming in, and I think we're going to answer that after you've shown us how to program it. It has to do with a vapor infusion. There's a question about using a gin basket versus infusion. So the difference between using infusion, where you put the herbs into the path of the vapor, or actually putting the botanicals into the liquid as we did now. And we'll talk about that when we have seen how you program the iStill 100. So
back to me, and I have to put on my reading glasses for this kind of work. Or maybe we need to upgrade to a really, really big screen. Probably still need my reading glasses. So I've got a little stylus here that comes actually with your iStill. It says iStill. It's pretty fun. And in case you've got fat fingers, this will really help you out in manipulating and managing the touchscreen. And if you look at the touchscreen, the first thing you'll see is that we can decide to heat and cool, to do a pot still run or a column still. There's no agitator on this machine, so things like mashing and other stuff we can't really do, but for sure we can do all kinds of distillation programs. In fact, this machine is so advanced that if you look at the grayed out area, it can even manipulate and control up to 7 other mashers and fermenters and iStills. That's what we call central distillery management. For now we don't need that because we already have everything charged. We basically want to do, well, a pot still run, right? Because it's a taste-rich product that we're making. And it's already high proof, 30% proof or 30% ABV, 60 proof. It's quite high, no need for any column action. We're just going to go for pot still. Now here you see an oversight of the iStill. And we can see that the temperatures in the boiler are already 49.3 degrees. The reason is we preheated the still a little bit to make sure we get some more flavors out of those juniper berries that, if you remind correctly, we added a bit earlier. What we're going to do now is we're going to go to settings. And quite easily you can see how a pot still program is set up. If you want to make gin, you basically have a heat up period, a period where heads are taken, a period where hearts are taken, and then in the end maybe you take tails, or you basically decide to stop the run and leave the tails in the machine. The nice fruity light flavors come over near the heads, and then the hearts capture most of the juniper and the rooty flavors that we want to go for. You see that we work by temperature. So heat up goes until 45 degrees Celsius. We take heads until 80 degrees Celsius. We take hearts until 91. And if we want to recover in an efficient and economical way the remaining alcohol, we'll do the tails run until 97, and then the program automatically stops, just like it automatically starts if I push start, and it automatically starts to cool as well. Agitator isn't working because we didn't install one. And basically what we have to do right now is start the process. But before we do that, I actually would like you to see that we've got some more recipes there. You can see them over here. Right? So I go to recipes and I can see that I'm doing an iGin recipe. We don't have to look into cuts, we don't have to break them down in different beakers because we already did that. We know this recipe, and I'm running the same recipe in the iStill 100 as Willem is running in the iStill Mini. So based on the recipe development here, this is the recipe that we made, and this is how it looks. Cut heads at 80, hearts at 91, tails at 97, the run power is 60%, and the robot is basically completely open at 2000. So we go back. And now the only thing we have to do is push start. You can see the machine turns on. It's looking at the top temperature probe, which is 21.1. We're doing the iStill gin program. The phase that it's at is called heating up, and the set point is 45 degrees. So basically, by the time the yellow temperature that's now 21.1, if that becomes 45, it will automatically put on the cooling and go to heads collection, then hearts collection, then tails collection, until it's ready to actually stop, and it will do that as well automatically. So that's it for right now. I suppose that every now and then we're going to go back to this overview and show you how the gin comes out, but for now I think it's back to Sebastian for the moment.
Yes, and questions are coming in, so Odin, if you'll stay there, and I'll ask the first question about the still, because we have a question, are gin hooks in all size boilers? So do all iStills have gin hooks?
Yes, they do.
We're live, so it takes a little bit of time. Yeah.
No problem. There's a lot of ground to cover. Yeah, and the answer to that question is yes, they do. Gin hooks are a tremendously simple way of helping you make gin. Why are they very simple? Because you basically cut out two pieces of metal and you weld them to a certain part of the boiler, and you can use those hooks to hang the bags like we do. So they're very simple to make, and I always feel that the most simple solution to any challenge or any issue is basically, well, no solution, right? The less you need to intervene, the less work you need to do, the less work you need to do, the easier the solution is. The more simpler solution is usually the better one. So yes, every iStill has, from 100 liters up to 5,000 liters, has got 4 gin hooks, and they're quite oversized, so you can hang a lot of bags there. And how can you use those gin hooks? Well, I mean, not that you asked, but I'm sharing it anyhow. If you want to do boiler infusion, have an easy cleaning protocol, you just put all of your herbs in your bags and you hang them somewhat deeper into the liquid. But what if you want to do vapor infusion? You can still use the same gin hooks because the hooks are relatively high up. And since they're relatively high up, if you make the ropes a bit shorter on the bags, you can actually have your herbs in the vapor path and create a vapor infused, a vapor distilled gin instead of a boiler infused or boiler distilled gin.
And what would you say is the main difference between a botanical distilling or vapor infusion?
Yeah, if you want to actually say like what's the difference between a vapor infused gin and a boiler infused gin, you have to imagine that liquids, so in the boiler, contact with the herbs, with the berries, what basically happens is that liquids are much more dense than vapors. Vapors have only 1,000th to 1,500th of the molecular density compared to liquids. So if you want a lighter style gin, vapor infusion is pretty good. If you want a bold style gin with loads of flavor, you shouldn't go vapor infusion, you should go boiler infusion and put everything in the boiler, because the intensified cooking, the intensified contact basically creates more flavor oils coming over in the product you're making.
Okay, so we have a couple of questions on ABV, and they're all related, so let's talk about ABV. The ABV that we started with was 30%. in the boiler today for the gin. And there's also a question coming in on ABV. Does a higher or lower ABV influence the taste when we're distilling? And also, why don't we go for a higher ABV than that 30% that's in the boiler now? So why did we go for 30%?
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. I think these kind of things should always go based on honesty, right? We're actually making gin, we're doing this, we're doing that. You see, it's a live show, it's not pre-recorded, so we can sort of wipe out all the little mistakes that you actually make going live. Well, we prepared 30% basically because that's the kind of gin I like. And there is a huge huge difference in terms of influence if you go for a higher ABV. Basically, what a higher ABV does is two things. It creates more yield, so during a run that takes longer because there's more alcohol, you will eventually make more gin. But you also get a different flavor profile in your gin. So the higher your proof is, let's say we go from 30 to 35 or 38 or even 40, the more dry the gin becomes. And you've probably noticed, right, when you tasted and tested a few gins that some of them can be quite astringent, almost sucking the saliva out of your mouth. And when that happens, that basically means that you are probably drinking a gin that was distilled at a higher proof. For instance, London Dry Style needs to be distilled above 70%, not as an input, but as an output. And that is a relatively dry style. It's called London Dry for that very reason of astringency where I just spoke about. I like to go a bit lower because a lower ABV creates a slightly more mellow style that is not as dry as a traditional London Dry Style, which is probably distilled with 35 to 38% in the boiler relative to the 30% that we put in.
Okay, so another question we have here, and that's on the citrus that we're using. Citrus, and the question is, do we use the zest or also the pith? Well, most of the time what we like to do is use dried citrus, so either lemon peel, orange peel, grapefruit peels. They're dried. Why? They're far more easy to store, they're far more easy to work with. And when you have fresh or dry, big difference between them is actually a lot of water. There's a lot of water in the fresh peels that gets out when you dry it, but all the flavor is still there. It's actually more compacted because there's less water. I don't know if you can see it from there, but maybe we can zoom in later. I've got some of the orange peel here that we're using when we're making gin with orange. We did that in the last live stream that we did, and you can actually see that there's quite some white here, quite some pith left. We're going to another camera so we can zoom in. You can see probably that it's a lot of white here, which is the pith, which will give you, if you macerate or extract, will give you those bitter flavors you have from orange. But most of the time when you distill it, those bitter flavors don't come over until the very, very end, when usually you're in your tills collection already. So what we do is we don't use fresh citrus, we use dried citrus, and the pith is still there. Gives you a little bit more of a background, a little bit more of the third dimension, as we like to call it. Over to another question. My gin always turns out really sharp, not from the alcoholic sharpness, but I suspect the juniper oils to be the source. Do you have any tips on how to get a mild soft distillate? Of course we do. Best tip I can give you is let us work with you, so book us for recipe development. But also, I think Willem can explain this because he's doing just the thing you need to do to get rid of those juniper oils. So Willem, what is actually happening here at the Mini at the moment?
Well, we are making the same recipe as in the iStill 100. And what I just did is I took a head cut. And this head cut has a lot of juniper oils. And if you want a mild spirit, a mild product, you just toss away the first 10 to 20 milliliters. And that should work out, yeah.
Okay. How do you recommend starting on developing the recipe? More specifically, how do I take the best out of the 5-week rest time of the NMS until I will be able to taste the final result? Good question. It's practice, practice, and practice. The way to make a good gin recipe is just keep developing your recipe. You start out with a formula, and the best way to get to know that formula is to go to the iStill University online, take the course. We will teach you into detail there how you start up a recipe. And from there, it's just a question of practicing, getting to know your botanicals, getting to know what they do in which amounts and how they complement each other, or sometimes even fight with each other. Then when you do that, you let it rest for those 5 weeks of marrying. That's when you dilute it with the water and all the molecules have to find another place until it's completely good to go. And after that, when you taste it, just make notes. You've tasted it when it comes right off the still, and you taste it after 5 weeks. There's a certain mellowness going on there that will be the same basically over all the recipes. But the only way to make sure that you get that is to practice, practice, and practice. And what I always say to people who want to be great gin makers, you have to know your botanicals, you have to know about flavor. So from now on, everything you're going to eat or drink, analyze. Get that library of sense of smells into your head so you can work with those senses to make a great recipe. Do you program temperature stalls for time to prolong foreshots or heads to get it out of the way before the heart's cut? Well, that's a good question. How does the program actually work, Odin?
Yeah, the way I interpret the question, but correct me if I didn't hear it correctly, is that yes, we use temperature in order to actually cut for heads, hearts and tails. And as you saw that we did a cut of the heads all at 80 degrees, right? So everything that comes over before 80 degrees will be heads, will be more astringent, will be something we don't really want in the distillate.
And that's the same part that Willem now just took off and tossed away. Yeah.
So only the iStill Mini is a bit smaller, so quite a bit.
It's a quite small.
The cut is smaller,
and
not just the cut is smaller, but also it's going a bit quicker because the goal of the 100 and everything above that is basically to help you produce gin in massive quantities. Repeatable, reliable, and efficient. And the goal of the Mini is different. The goal of the Mini is to do as many runs as possible so that you can actually build up that experience that Sebastian spoke about in order to become a better distiller with a better gin recipe. So yeah, we basically manipulate the temperatures inside the still, and we only have to do that once. That's the fun part. Because our app for the Mini, as well as the big production machines, they all have air pressure sensors that we build in-house, designed in-house, like everything else, actually measuring what's going on in terms of air pressure so that any deviation from the boiling point of water, from the boiling point of ethanol, and those are the two beginning and end temperatures, right? 78 and 100 of water at the end. Anything in between, anything that changes on a millisecond, on a minute basis, definitely on a 4 or 5 hour run, is automatically corrected.
Okay, and also when you want to do another recipe, you can easily program that in, save it under a different name, so you have different gin recipes or whiskey recipes or whatever you're making in your library.
Yeah, what we actually advise people to do is the still comes with a gin recipe that's pretty good, but really it depends on what kind of gin you want to make, right? You don't want to make our style gin, you want to make your style gin. So basically use our program and maybe change it a little bit. A bit more fruitiness at the beginning, maybe go from 80 to 79.5. A bit more rooty, tailsy flavors, go to 92 instead of 91 and see what happens. And based on those decisions, save that under a different name. So you have my recipe always as a backup, and now you've got a new recipe as well.
Okay. We're going to shut up now for a couple of seconds. And that actually answers the question that Commander Bond has. How quiet is the iStill 100 when it's in operation? Well, it is in operation at the moment. Doesn't make any noise at all. Actually, if you hear a slight buzz in the background, that's the water from the cooling system of the Mini. That's all we're hearing at the moment. With the bigger units, the only sound that you get is if the agitator is on, and it's also very, very quiet, isn't it?
Yeah, and I find that it's actually a more important question than maybe you realize, Commander Bond. Not just from the perspective that is it harsh on the ears and is it difficult to work in a distillery. In most distilleries it is because they're noisy. I don't like noisy distilleries, I don't like noisy places to start with. And there's two reasons for that. I'm my ears are pretty sensitive, and it always tires me if I work in an environment that is loud and noisy. But secondly, from an engineering perspective, things that make noise are things that are built with very high tolerances. Imagine that cogs have to come together and there's like a millimeter of play in there. They start to rattle. Rattle creates sounds. There's frictions. Frictions actually create sounds. So everything in a machine that makes sounds is potentially something that is not working optimal, something that's not designed optimal. So for me, as the designer of the iStill, to be able to develop a still that does not make any noise basically is very important, because it tells us that we've made it to perfection, that all of the measurements are correct.
And I think our coffee machine makes more noise than the iStill 2000, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah.
It's a non-grinding coffee machine, just so you know, right? It works with capsules. Yeah. I had this question, if you don't mind, to add a little anecdotal story here. When we started building stills here, the city was very afraid about smell and about truck movements and about the noise we were going to make. And I had to invite them over to actually show them how little noise we make here, right? So it's not really an issue, but it can be hard to actually explain that to the city, because they expect something to be very noisy, because most breweries and most distilleries are.
I think we have someone who's a fan, and Robert Avery asked, what's the price of the iStill 100? Well, the best way to find out is go to the website, go to the design center, because there are different options that give you different prices. Another question. Can you address the difference between using the gin hooks versus the gin basket? I think we've answered that, Sean. If the answer wasn't complete to you, or you have a more in-depth question about it, please put it again into the chat. We'll come back to that later. But I think we already talked about vapor infusion using a gin basket, or just hooking up the bags. GNS has close to zero methanol content, but does diluting it with water cause additional amounts of methanol during the distilling process? Which of you would like to answer that? I think, yeah. If it's going to be a very long answer, I'll interrupt him.
No, this is a short one. Methanol does not come from thin air. It has to exist already in order to get it in your product. And if there is almost no methanol, or if there is no methanol in your 96% GNS, then there will be no methanol when you dilute it down.
Yeah, if I may add to that, the short answer is actually no, but thanks for the more elaborated answer, that's really good. The methanol discussion is a more important one in the wider production of alcohol kind of take on it. And what I mean to say is that it's a fear maker, right? It's like, oh, be careful, you're going to make your own drinks. How do you know you're not poisoning or blinding people because, you know, methanol? And like Willem said correctly, if there isn't any to start with, there won't be any in the end product. In water, there isn't any. If your GNS doesn't have any methanol, neither will your drink. What about whiskey? What about other products? Even though they're not a topic right now, I do find it important to address this question, because it is a fear-mongerer that you really need to get rid of. Methanol is basically alcohol that is made from wood sugars. Now, when do you have some wood in your alcohol production process? Basically only if you've got stems and stalks. So if you've got fruits that weren't cleaned correctly, you have some wood sugars there that will form in 50% good ethanol and 50% methanol. If you look at grains, if you look at rums, there is no methanol present because there's no wood structures present in the actual making process, or very, very limited amounts.
Yes, and so when we're using the GNS, that's not a problem at all. All right, a couple of questions on marrying. Can we explain what is actually happening chemically during the marrying process, and also can we speed that up or even skip that part before we bottle it? Well, again, it's a chemical question, so I'll go to Willem.
Ethanol and water don't really mix quickly. It needs time to settle down to find their own place in a mixture. And if you pour them together, you can see different substances floating around in your beaker or in your vessel. And it takes some time for the molecules to settle. It will take time for them to find their own place and distribute evenly. And I think another question was about speeding it up.
Yep.
Right? You can speed it up if you agitate it, and I think Odin has something about agitating and maturing. Yeah.
can add some information to that. So, yeah, the marriage of water and alcohol is tremendously important because alcohol is a solvent and slight amounts of water basically dissolve over time in alcohol. Why is this important? Because if you drink your gin too quickly, within, let's say, a 3-4 week period, that water wouldn't have completely dissolved in alcohol. Now, if you drink it and it gets over your tongue, what actually happens is that the alcohol starts to suck liquids out of your tongue. So you get a tingling, almost peppery experience that may be interesting in a gin, but then again, a week later it's gone, right? Because it didn't come from the herbs, but it came from something else. Uncompleted marriage of water and ethanol. So how do you speed up the process? Well, like Willem indicated, you speed it up like any other chemical process, basically by heating up. And if you heat things up, usually per 10 degrees centigrade, any chemical reaction doubles in speed. So if you go from 20 to 30 degrees, all of a sudden, instead of 5 weeks, you may end up with 3 weeks of marrying. If you go to 40, you may end up with a week and a half. If you go to 50, you may end up with maybe 4 days of the marriage actually taking place. So we have programs in the bigger iStills, the ones that have agitators, to actually mix the water and the alcohol very good and heat it to a certain temperature. And that way we can skip the 5 week marriage process, or not really skip it, basically bring it back from 5 weeks to around 3-4 days, which saves you time to money to market time, right?
Yeah.
So
And if I'm using an iStill 100 and I don't have an agitator,
you can still heat it up.
Yeah, you still heat it up. If I'm not that bothered for the time and I have 5 weeks, is it okay to marry in the bottles, or would you say don't bottle it until you've finished your marrying process?
I would always advise to bottle after marrying if it takes 3 days with a bigger iStill, or 5 weeks because you've got time. And the reason is that bottles have a tendency of being closed, right? You put the liquids in and then you put a cork in the bottle, and the cork usually seals what's inside the bottle.
Right.
And as water marries to alcohol, it basically dissolves partially, I'm exaggerating here, into the alcohol. So the alcohol percentage becomes a little bit higher. Let's say 43, it's now 43.5. But as a consequence, the level of the total liquids becomes slightly smaller. Now,
so there's less in the bottle.
There is slightly less. It's almost impeccable. There's slightly less.
Yeah.
And the problem with corking it and then assuming the marriage takes place is that as the water tries to dissolve in alcohol, it can't, because it draws a vacuum under the cork. And if it draws a vacuum under the cork, then the marriage process won't take place.
Okay. John is asking, is Willem running the same recipe in the Mini? Yes, the Mini and the 100 are doing the exact same recipe at the moment. How is it going with this run at the moment?
I think it's pretty good. Yeah.
Pretty good?
Yeah.
And of course, the 100 is far bigger still.
Still warming
5
up.
liters, and we have, well, 100 liters in there, almost.
Yeah.
So, still heating up. All right, so let's take some more questions. Is it okay to use corks for long-term storage if you bottle your final product? Of course it is, but I would also recommend go for, not for the natural cork, but for the, what do you call it, artificial cork? Synthetic corks, because although because it's a natural product, cork itself, sometimes it starts to deteriorate, or it can have a little fungus on it, and then like with wine, your whole spirit is corked. Usually when distillers get complaints about their gin or their whiskey, it's about the corks. So why not go for synthetic corks instead?
I have one little story to add to that. We had a customer that made an actually amazing gin based on his own apples. He's got an orchard. And then what happened is basically his gin started to turn yellowish, and it got enough flavor. And how come it got enough flavor? And then it turns out the corks were from a relatively affordable place, and they somehow treated the corks for whatever reason with chemicals. And those chemicals leached back in the gin, and they ended up destroying the whole batch. Luckily solving the problem and now knowing what to do better, but no go.
Okay. How many grams of botanicals did we use per liter of the spirit in the boiler? What about the range of botanicals per liter? Well, as mentioned before, we're not going to give you the complete recipe because we think, well, we're all about sharing information and sharing knowledge. We're not about sharing recipes. Of course, you can try to emulate this recipe yourself, but it's going to be your gin. You need to decide how much botanicals you want to use. Basically, what we do when we're making a gin, we don't go over 6 or 7 botanicals.
Yeah.
Unless there's something very special that a customer wants us to use. Of course, we can do that and make sure they work together. But why would we not go for 10 botanicals?
Well, I think quite easy. The test that we do and others come to the same conclusion is that the human palate is capable of distinguishing 6, maybe 7 ingredients.
Yes.
And you can test this yourself by making gin or by doing something else and eating something with multiple ingredients. If you add an 8th, 9th or 10th one, you don't recognize it or you start to not recognize others. So for the gin to actually make sense and for you to have a story to tell like, this is in it. Oh, actually I taste that. There's some anise in there. Oh yeah, I thought I got that. And there's this and that in it. And people are like, really? How long does this go on? Because those things I didn't get. Do they add to the experience? Do they add to your flavor profile? No. They may add to the whole marketing story, which is more about, I've got 20 herbs in my gin. And then you say like, yeah, but I've got 21. So mine is better.
Or even 47.
Or even 47. And with all due respect, try it, right? And feel how muddy it is from the experience that it's not really a bad gin, but there's like really try to signify what goes on where in your mouth. It's impossible because there's too many ingredients. And I think a gin master tries to limit the amount of ingredients he works with. There's only 3 dimensions in your mouth, right? And 3 intensity levels. And if you want to find out more, again, go to the university. There's a few movies for free for you to check out. There's a lot of information on the iStill blog that we share about how flavors sit where in your mouth, how you can distinguish them. And if you do 3 times 3, you end up with 9. So any ingredient above 9 doesn't really have a place in your mouth to be identified. It's a waste of money.
Yeah. Let's see. We have a question from James Cook about Louching. So the gin is Louching. He has a very citrusy gin, a lot of flavor there, especially at the start. So in the first dimension, as we like to call it, a little bit of cinnamon at the end, which makes perfect sense. But even he says if he uses 50%, diluting to 50%, it starts to louch.
Yeah.
So, what does it mean? It means he has a lot of oils over.
Congratulations, right? I mean, you got a lot of flavor over, and if you allow me, James, and you can't really say no, so here you are. If you allow me to digress a little bit, as a craft distiller, you're not about the cheap solution, right? You're about flavor. Big alcohol produces alcoholic beverage at an astonishing low price level. Cost price level. You can never beat that. So I think that every craft distiller only has one go-to place, and that is amazing flavors. Okay, costs more to actually make, it costs more to purchase, but at least you get an experience back that is amazing. A lot of flavor. So you got a lot of flavor over. The good thing is you can now use more GNS at the same strength as what you want to bottle your gin at, and you're basically going to dilute it until the haze lifts. And the moment the Louching has gone, in a second basically, 2 seconds this happens, this is where you find your maximum flavor saturation. The flavors, the essential oils that you get over that are extracted from the herbs, from the berries, need a place in the solvency of the alcohol. As you water your alcohol down from 70 to 60 to 50 to 40, the solvency power of that alcohol goes down. It can hold less oils, it can hold less flavor. So given the fact that the 50% is a good indication, there's a lot of essential oils. For me, that means I wouldn't bring it back down too low. Maybe 43, maybe 44, maybe do a navy strength, but never go to 40 in this case. But use, let's say 1 liter of that 43, let's say we choose 43, and actually dilute that with 1 liter of 43% GNS. And then you'll see if it lifts. If it doesn't, add another half a liter. If it doesn't, add another quart liter and slowly work your way downwards. That's how much flavors, how much oils you can get over with the iStill. And it almost makes it very easy to produce a gin, because by the time you're done with a run on even a 100, if you have to dilute it with 2 or 3 times the amount of GNS, all of a sudden, instead of 70 bottles, you're maybe making 200 bottles.
So it's actually more economical.
Yeah, but let's not say that live, because now nobody will buy a 2000 anymore.
Well, they will if they're very popular.
Yeah.
If the gin is very popular. All right, so we're doing the runs on the Mini and on the 100.
Yep.
Both of them don't have an agitator at the moment.
Yep.
The question is, if we do it on a bigger still and we do use the agitator, is there a difference in taste?
I don't think so. There's a few things to consider here. Like, it's one or the other, right? We put bags in right now. You saw us put the bags in the 100. If we have an agitator in and we put the bags in, we can't really put on the agitator, because the agitator would basically wrap the bags around it and pull it apart. And
yeah.
So what makes it easier with the agitator is that basically you can just add everything into the mix and agitate and combine everything, and it's very easy to clean out because everything is constantly being mixed. But it doesn't create more or different flavors in our experience.
No.
It's just like, what's your standard operating procedure? When we make gin on a 2000, and we sometimes do for customers, what we basically do is we still use the bags, because there's a lot of stuff in a 2000 liter run. We use many bags. There's always an agitator in there, because most 2000s have that, but we don't put the agitator on. If you want to go a different route and actually put everything in, we've even got customers that with an iStill 100 just put it full without bags with herbs and do tremendously intense runs.
Yep.
Without any issues. Well, more herbs means more flavors, but agitating or not is basically an operating decision.
Yep. We also did the test with the Mini, because you can agitate the Mini if you want to. And we did that in the beginning, taking the same gin recipe, agitating it, or doing it just in the bag. You get the same results, basically.
Yep.
All right, I macerate my botanicals, says Carl, I think, but also broil the citrus peels until they start to burn brown. I read where chefs do this as the sharp bitterness mellows. Do you have any thoughts on that? I think that's not the reason chefs do that, because when they start to broil or even start to fry off peels, it's actually to caramelize the sugars that are in there. It's not to do with getting the bitterness out. Of course, it's less bitter if you have some sweet caramel there. If you go even further and your caramel starts to burn, really caramelize, then you get bitterness as well. So that's not the reason to do that. I wouldn't recommend broiling your citrus before you put it into the still, because what you're basically doing by heating it up is changing the molecular structure, but also you're losing out on oils.
Yeah, and not just any oils. The citrusy ones are very important. In a gin, basically, we always think that lime or citrusy flavors are like the second flavor after the juniper. They are after the coriander, but the coriander attributes to the citrusy flavors to a large extent, which are happening really as a taste sensation in the first second in your mouth. So you've got to get those right. And if you start to caramelize them, what you're basically doing, if you're doing it correctly, you're creating a sugar browning reaction, which is either caramel, which only creates color. Color doesn't come over in distillation.
Nope.
Or if you go slowly enough, you create a Maillard reaction, which actually adds a three-dimensional drink at the back end, but at the cost of the fruity flavors in the beginning.
Yeah, they will be gone.
They'll be gone. So,
yeah.
And it's a lot of work, so don't do it.
Don't do it. Now, the only thing I could recommend, if you want to toast something off before your gin, it works with nuts. If you have hazelnuts or almonds or that kind of nuts, if you lightly toast them, bring some more oils to the surface, you get more flavor.
The reason for that is just thinking out loud here is actually makes total sense, because nuts are related to rooty and nutty flavors. That's where the Maillard reaction sits as well. So you're basically bringing the flavor up that you want to bring up, instead of bringing a flavor up at the cost of citrusy flavors at the start.
Exactly.
Hope that makes sense.
Right, speaking of citrus, Kjeld, how do you decide which botanical works best in the extractor or in the boiler? Well, that's a good question. It has nothing to do, I think, with the botanical itself. It has to do with the way you want to use the botanical. But Willem, can you elaborate on that?
Well, it depends on what you want to achieve. If it is a botanical that is either seasonal or very rare, then you can harvest it at once and you can extract it and then you can store it for a very long time. If you want a very bold gin, then you could use the extractor to extract all the flavors out of your ingredient. What I like to do is use the extractor for ingredients that take a lot of time to get the oils into your solvent. I always give the example of cinnamon. It will accelerate the process and win you time, and it is efficient and therefore will save you money. I think that should be enough as an explanation, or would you like to add something?
Yeah, I think your explanation makes total sense. I'd like to sort of translate it into what are you going to use as your standard operating procedure. In general, the extraction results from extractor use are higher than even boiler infusion. So this basically means that if you want to go for an even bigger dilution factor, basically, I think it was the question that was asked about the Louching gin that needed more GNS in order to come back into solution. And if you use an extractor, you even need more GNS. So basically, what the extractor allows you to do is move to what is called in the industry a multi-shot approach. And a multi-shot approach, I find it a very difficult term to work with, but some use it, so let's use it here, is that instead of trying to do one run and that's your gin, you do a very concentrated run and you use a lot of GNS to actually create from that one run more gin. And in that case, the extractor is your friend. If you want to go more traditional style, or if you want to buy a bigger iStill, just doing a short sales pitch here, sorry guys, just joking around, you know me. Then boiler infusion may be your friend here.
Yes, and also of course the seasonal products, any seasonal products use the extractor.
Yeah.
Makes it far easier. We have a question about, I think, copper stills versus the iStills and heads and tails. Normally when you use copper stills, you lose 5% head and 10% or 50% tails, says Xavier. I don't know exactly what you mean by this, so maybe you can rephrase it in the chat so we can talk a little bit about copper versus stainless steel.
Yeah, that's possible, but what I hear in his question is that copper stills have a certain loss that maybe our stills do not have. And
that's possible.
That doesn't relate though to the copper, it relates to the controls
yeah.
and the internals of the still, not the material it's made from. So
exactly.
If you want to explain a bit more, Xavier, about what you really want to ask, we'll happily dive in.
Yep. How much power do you supply to the small still and the big one during gin distillation? Do you have different power levels for heads, hearts and tails? Do we have those at the moment?
I keep the power manager on 50%, meaning 1 kilowatt, and I think that is translated to the iStill 100, and I think it's scaled up on a 101 for the same vapor speed.
Yeah, so basically for the bigger still, we chose 60% as its running power. That might be a bit on the lower side. We might have to go to actually 70%. But this is the new iStill 100, right? So the base program for the old iStill 100, which had a slightly more narrow column, higher vapor speed, giving a certain power input. It also has different heaters, so we're looking for the optimum here. 60% is a nice go-to place in any of our designs. We do have the possibility to actually say, like, I want to run 60% at heads, 70% at hearts, and maybe 50% at tails, or anything else, right? We do not use it very often. We usually, throughout the run, use one power setting. So we use two power settings, one for heat up, a high power setting, and then a lower power setting for the rest of the run. If you want to tailor it, no problem. The machinery, the automation allows you to do that. But we don't usually do that. We usually look at the heads and tails cut point to influence flavor more than at changing power settings.
We have a question, what is the best way to simulate a pot still run on the iStill next gen with the Mini? Well, basically that's what we're doing. We've opened the valve completely. That's the same as we did on the 100. There the robot is opened completely, yeah. Which means both of them are functioning in pot still modus. If you want to know more about the difference between what we call column mode or pot still mode, please go to the university website, and I think it's all explained in the course.
It's all explained in the course, and if you look carefully at the screen that we actually put on display for you just, 15-20 minutes ago, what you saw was the robot opening at 2000, which is, just so you know, a very big opening. So it's basically functioning as a pot still. If we bring that down to, let's say, 200, you get a lot of reflux, and we'd start to sort of more create a vodka out of a gin, which doesn't really make sense.
No. Something about the methanol, someone added it mostly comes from the fruit pectins. Yes, and pectins, of course, are found in fruits, or mostly they are found also in the stalks, the stems, the stones, and the pit of the fruit. So we're not talking about different things here. Again, we're back to marrying. It's always an interesting subject, isn't it? Does the water used in the marriage influence the final product? So are we going for spring water, demineralized water, distilled water? Are we getting impurities out of the water?
You want me to have a go at it?
Yeah, sure.
Basically, people love to say like, oh, I use special spring water from a well here underground, and look at the hills and the trees and how amazing and beautiful it is, and taste the water. Oh, it's amazing. So that's what we use for our gin. Yeah, that's okay, but then please distill the water or reverse osmosis before you use it. And simply because the water that we as people enjoy has got some mineral content to it, right? And what's the problem with mineral content? Basically, it takes up space. And as a craft distiller, you want to create maximum flavors. And for that, you need solvency. And if part of the solvency of the alcohol is actually taken by the minerals in the water, you very quickly create another louching problem that you now have to add more GNS to, relatively more GNS than when you actually reversed osmosed or distilled your diluting water, which basically means you're diluting flavors. So use the water, but use reverse osmosis or distillation to clean up that water.
Yep. And of course we do like mineral water, but we like it when we're fermenting.
Yes, in that case.
In that case.
Put it in.
And that's the question, can we do the, let's see, someone asked if we couldn't do another Q&A like we're doing now on whiskey. Maybe we'll do that in the future.
Yeah, sure.
It's a good suggestion, sure. And then we'll be talking about mineral water, probably.
Yeah. A lot.
Yeah. Okay, let's see. Do we recommend bottling batch by batch or creating a bigger batch by mixing small batches together? Willem, want to answer that?
We mix everything together, don't we? For bottling?
We usually do.
Yeah.
I think what you're referring to is a sort of Solera method where you actually this is very, very common practice, for instance, in the whiskey industry, where they do 1 barrel, 2 barrel, 3 barrels, and they mix number 1, 2, and 3 together before they start bottling, because, you know, the distillation equipment is outdated. Sorry, is not as modern as what we have, so there's variance in the new make spirit, and then maybe the barrel is a bit different. But if we choose 3 barrels and we mix them, we're probably going to end up with a sort of intermediate hybrid version of what we always put in a bottle.
Blending the whiskies together.
Blending them together, right? For a gin, you really don't need to do that because, well, with our equipment, you've got perfect controllability and repeatability on your distillation process. So the flavors will always be the same. So there's really no need to build up a bigger batch than you do, and that you want to make just one batch, dilute it, let it marry, and bottle it. And the next batch, if you use the same herbs, will be exactly the same. So short answer is no.
We can also imagine if you do, for instance, you make a lot of gin.
Yeah.
I have 3 containers all with 1,000 liters of gin that I married.
Yeah.
Can I put them together at the bottling plant? Or does it take, again, when I put them together, some time for another marrying process?
If they're all married, it's okay. You can just mix them.
You can just mix them.
Yeah. Just make sure you mix them.
Yeah, so not a problem there.
Yeah.
How different is using the regular column for gin versus extractor? Does it reduce time? Again, it depends on what you want to use it for. Sometimes it saves time, sometimes it's a lot of work. It just depends on what you want to do. You don't use the extractor for speed, you don't use the extractor to speed up the process or make it more economical. It does make it more economical in some ways, but you use the extractor because you want a certain kind of flavor from a certain kind of botanical. Yeah. That's why we use it. And we have another question on the extractor. No, sorry, that's not the extractor. Are there any ingredients that are better vapor infused? Well, there's differences of opinion out there. I'll give you my opinion, no.
Yeah, I'll give you my opinion, which is also no.
So we'll go to Willem.
I have only one example of all the ingredients I researched, and that is ginger. Because the moment ginger gets heated up, it changes in flavor. But other than that, nope.
And I think that's a very important question, and thanks for adding that about the ginger. I didn't know that, Willem, so compliments.
Recently, so that's no,
Compliments.
Didn't share it yet.
It goes back to a story where all of a sudden 10, 12 years ago, Bombay Sapphire hit the market and became pretty big. And it was supposed to be vapor infused, so everybody in the craft distilling industry started like sheep following, oh, it has to be vapor infused because it's better, because Bombay Sapphire is better, because it's commercially very good. Well, if you try Bombay Sapphire and put it against any of the gins our customers make, you'll never order Bombay Sapphire to start with. That's number one, and really mean that. Secondly, now an industry starts to develop about carter heads, right? About vapor infusion machines, about anything. And that industry doesn't want to let go. So I come to the market and I, like Willem does right now, I used to be like this 10 years ago and I tested everything. And as I tested everything, I found out that it's, with all the respect, and I didn't know about the ginger, it's complete belungus, right? Any ingredient is better, more flavorful if you distill it in the boiler, and lighter in flavor if you vapor infuse it. Now, then they said, yeah, everything is, apart from the peels. And that makes sense, right? Because peels, I don't know, they're fruits, and somehow it makes sense to treat them more gentle. So I tried that, and again, just put them in the boiler. Works fine, you get over more flavors, and you don't ruin the flavors. Then people said like, yeah, but at least leave us the flowers, right? The flowers need to be in the vapor path. Really? Why? Because they're so fragile. And everybody understands that. Let's put crystal in there, right? That's fragile and expensive. But if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and we tested it. Yeah. I think there is one reason why vapor infusion, if you allow me to continue down that path, might be superior, where it actually is superior to boiler infusion, and that is in risk management. If you boil your ingredients for 10 hours, there is a moment when you're going to overcook them, like making that steak or making that soup. There is going to be a moment where, like, really, you're going to boil it for another hour? I thought it was good an hour ago. What does the extra hour bring apart from more energy consumption? And maybe off flavors because you start to overcook. The advantage of vapor infusion is because the touch is so light, only 1,000th, is that you never overcook because vapors don't cook actually. The cooking takes place in the boiler. So less flavors in vapor infusion, but no risk of overcooking. More flavors in boiler infusion, but at the end of the run you need to be careful where to cut because otherwise you overcook. Now, the reason we invented the extractor was that I hate those kinds of compromises. I hated that you have to go with a plus minus in any solution, and the extractor is exactly what a boiler does. It does liquid extractions. And liquid extractions have the advantage of being very, very flavorful. But since in the extractor no cooking, no boiling takes place, wow. Actually, we do not have the risk of overcooking, of overboiling. So instead of having a plus minus or a minus plus solution, the extractor offers the best of both worlds. Liquid extraction without the risk of overcooking. And that's the real reason why you might want to look into the extractor. And do it on a small scale, right? Purchase the mini, you get the course for free as part of it. Work with it, have fun, see if you like it. If you don't, you know that you want to order a still without an extractor. If you do, you know what you need to purchase as an option next to your iStill.
Yes. All right. I personally prefer gin with a lot of citrus flavor. It's written here. Any tips on how to start developing a recipe? Maybe a quick how-to. Well, yes. The easiest way of doing that is look at the iStill blogs or look at the iStill YouTube channel, and there is something that Odin did. I think it's years ago that you developed this, called Odin's Easy Gin, really which is a very citrusy gin, and that's a great starting point. So start there, then look to the first live stream that we did in August, where Willem and I made an orange gin. We did that with the extractor and the mini. So those are very good starting points for a gin with a lot of citrus flavors, and go from there. Just experiment and keep tasting, keep improving your recipe.
And to add to that, if it's good, why change it, right? I mean, I remember visiting in the Pacific Northwest the distillery together with my good friend Carl. I don't know if Carl is online already. I think it's 5:30 in the Pacific Northwest right now. He should be there. He told me he would get up because he had some difficult questions for me. So we're still anticipating his arrival, or at least the arrival of the questions.
He's not here yet.
He's not here yet. That's a shame. Anyhow, we visited this distillery together, and the owner was quite rude in the sense that he had us wait for half an hour and just doing internal things. And then he came up to me and very defensively so said me like, if you try my gin and you think it's your gin, you're completely wrong because I did actually change the amount of coriander by 0.1 degrees, right? And I'm like, okay, no offense. And I tried the gin, and yes, it was Odin's Easy gin. And maybe he changed the amount of recipe by 0.1 degree because who the hell can tell? I can't.
And of course, you put it out there, so it's for everyone to use, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, have fun with it. It's a great starting point. And see if it misses something in your gin and maybe in your gin tonic.
Yeah. Yeah. Vape, I think from Germany. We'll go towards the still. They say, Odin, you're right. Even with the mini industrial gins do not taste at all. The tests we did are light years ahead of what is industrially out there. So I think that's a compliment. Thank you very much, guys. Keep trying, keep making recipes. And in the meantime, we'll go over to the 100 because we just heard the water come on, which means the still is ready to start. Well, actually distilling, everything is heated up. Yeah. So the cooling water came on because the temperature probes told us it's time to start cooling the vapors.
And we're actually distilling. I don't know if you can see that, but if I pinch this line, you can actually see the liquids going up, right? Can you see that? Well, we'll try again. We're taking heads right now. It's probably almost at around 80 degrees. You hear the beeping. We like our units to beep because, hey, I remember that question about how noisy is a distillery and how noisy is an iStill distillery. Well, it isn't noisy, and we like to use beeping sounds to get your attention and to actually tell you like, hey, mate, you need to be careful here because we're having a transition here from heating up to heads, from heads to hearts, from hearts to tails, from tails to the run is actually finished. And if you get those beeping sounds, it sort of automatically trains you, almost like Pavlov did to his dogs, like, hey, maybe I need to go and check. And well, we go and check, right? And we see that it's collecting some heads here right now. And not sure if we can see that, but I'll just go here. So what you see is that we're at 80 right now, right? And you remember that we said at around 80 we're going to cut to the hearts. You can actually see that we're talking heads collection still, and we're doing 80.1, so we're almost done with the heads. And why isn't it changing at 80? Because, well, we said 80, right? And it is 80. Because basically the set point is 80.2. Because the boiling point of ethanol isn't 78.3 as it normally is, but because it is 78.5, there's a high pressure front here. Apparently, we can do weather forecast with this machine. Actually, it automatically compensates. It's now 80.2. If it breaches that, it will go. If it breaches that, it will go to hearts. And if you go back to the camera close by, I can actually show you that now it does do hearts, right? And if we go to the output lines, you can see that this is all the heads that we collected and nothing comes out anymore. Instead, what comes out now comes out of the hard step. So we're using this vessel to collect. And why didn't we cut at 80 but at 80.2? Because the air pressure is higher and the machine automatically compensates. What you might also see if we go a bit closer here is that if you dive in here, you can actually see that the heating is on-off. So it's on an on-off cycle. It's within a second cycle. The reaction time is 10 seconds, so basically it's full continuous, but not full continuous on 100% as it was when we were heating up, but at 60% because we want slightly lower run speeds to make sure we don't get third-dimensional flavors over too early. You can see it rise, right? 81.4, 81.5, and it will slowly go through the program, 81.6, until it hits the set point of 91.2. And when it hits 91.2, over here, when it hits 91.2, currently at 82.2, it will be done with a hearts run, it will go to tails, etc., etc.
So Odin, now we have it on the screen. Everybody can see it. Can you explain it again, all the temperatures?
Yeah, you remember that in the beginning we had 100% power, and what you see is that the red dot was on continuously. Now it's on a sort of on-off cycle, which is the 60% power. It's 0.6 second on, 0.4 second off. You saw that we started with heads, but now you see that the hearts is actually green, so the hearts valve is open, we're collecting hearts. We see that the temperature is 84.1, and we're going to collect the actual hearts until 91.2. And again, the 91.2 doesn't make sense from the perspective that you remember us dialing in 91 and not 91.2. What made the change? The change was made automatically. If you look here, you see that the boiling point of ethanol today, at this very moment, is 78.5. That's 0.2 degrees higher than normal. And because it is, high air pressure, high weather front, the cut point is changed automatically, as the heads, as the tails, so that always you get the same product and the same flavor profile.
Also not just influenced by the weather, but also height, of course.
Yes, we have, for instance, distilleries that are set up in Utah and Colorado, and they're 2 kilometers, 2.5 kilometers, like 6,000–7,000 feet, and you have to imagine that the amount of air on top of you is so low that the air pressure is really low, and that the boiling point of ethanol is maybe 71 degrees instead of 78.5 like today here, like 1 meter below sea level. That's where we are. It also means that your cuts will be off. You can still use the same program because the machine will automatically realize what's going on and compensate accordingly. Yep. Now it's a bit noisier, right? But the only noise that you really hear, it's a bit noisier, but the only noise you really hear is because I'm standing next to the water, right? And if you allow me to zoom in a little bit here, if we go back to the screen, you can see that the cooling is on. Right, that's the green little valve over here. It's on and it says 21.6 degrees, which basically means that the cooling is working perfectly. I'm going to actually turn down the water a bit because we're wasting it. That's how easy it is, right?
Okay. So another question here from Mark from Japan. What's the best way to extract flavor from wood using the extractor, boiling or vapor? If you really want a wood flavor, if you want to take the flavors out of oak wood or even pine wood or what kind of wood you want to use the extractor. It's extremely good at getting all those wood flavors out, which is not the same as maturing your spirits in a cask because there's different processes involved there, but getting the flavors out of wood, use the extractor. We've done it before. It gives you great results if you want that wood flavor with the vanilla and with the tannins. Use shavings, put them in the extractor, you're good to go. I made a version of the original Odin gin, so that's Odin's Easy Gin, over the weekend and distilled today. It was 43% in the still. If I use 30% of the flavor, what changes can I anticipate? So instead of starting out with 43% in the boiler, if you start out with 30% like we did today, will it give you a different result flavor-wise?
Yeah. In a way it will, for 2 reasons. In Odin's Easy recipe we use maceration because not everybody that in that time that I reached out to had the equipment like we have right now. So very often people didn't have the opportunity to do on the herbs distillation runs.
Right.
So basically Odin's Easy recipe tells you to macerate your herbs for I think 2 weeks and then strain them out and then distill. Now the reason we need 43% is because 43% and above, basically all the oils from all the ingredients get dissolved and get out. If you go lower, and you chose 30 I understand, and you just started yesterday, that probably means that you didn't get the maceration result that you wanted for 2 reasons. A very short maceration time, if I listen to your question correctly, and a very low alcohol percentage, so a very low extraction potential. Doesn't have to be bad, by the way, let us know.
Yeah.
But it's not how the original recipe was intended.
All right. What's the highest ABV you would put in plastic containers? Well, I would always say if you are going to store it into plastic, make sure you have containers that are food safe. So it will tell you on the container when you buy it or when you order it, if it's safe to put food products in there. Then again, don't leave it in too long, because some of the IBCs that they use, those plastics have special weakeners in them to make the plastic more formable, and they can leak into your spirit. I would say don't leave it in there for more than half a year. What would you guys say?
Yeah, at marrying, yes. At 96, I would even process it quicker, because the aggressiveness and solvency power of almost double the amount of alcohol is going to have an impact. I remember visiting a distillery once in the USA that unfortunately wasn't doing as well as it should do, and I really mean should do. They had IBCs of GNS sitting there for 2 years, and when we opened them up, we saw a little film floating on top. And the indication was very strong that these were the softeners or the weakeners inside the plastic. Yeah. Because plastic is very hard without them, so they're added and they dissolve over time in alcohol.
May I add something to it?
Of course.
Great. If you want to use plastic, then always use Teflon, polypropylene or high density polyethylene. And with the last one, the high density polyethylene, don't go higher than 30% alcohol. The others can resist a higher percentage, but don't use high percentage on HDPE. And you can see it underneath the packaging or underneath the vessel, what type of plastic it is.
Yeah, food graded, food safe. Yeah, and you're good to go. Macerating at different ABVs, does that affect taste a lot? Well, yes, probably does. Usually what I always recommend is if you're macerating, and when we're talking about maceration, it's not the same as extracting. So for extracting there are different rules, but if you're macerating, it means that you're just putting your botanicals or your fruits into the alcohol and leave them so flavors can seep out into the alcohol. Yeah. As a rule of thumb, usually the denser the texture of your botanical is, or your fruit is, or your product is, the higher you can go up in ABV and in time. Anything to add to that?
Yeah. Maceration, basically 43% and above is okay. If you want to get a different herbs bill with a mixture of ingredients, 43 and higher will get everything out of everything. If you go extracting, Willem found some really interesting results on, and I think water and alcohol and how certain flavors dissolve in certain, well, in one of the two. So if you could elaborate on that a little bit.
Yes, I was reading another question. This was about choosing the right ABV. Okay, yeah.
So basically the right amount of alcohol and the right amount of water,
right?
Yeah,
it depends on the molecular structure, and I would keep it simple. You can see it in two ways. If you have a rooty substance, or if you have a citrus fruit, then the citrus fruit has a peel that resists rain, because you don't smell any oranges when it starts to rain, because that would mean that all the oils will seep out. For fruits, go high in ABV, and for water-soluble molecules, go in lower ABV.
Lower ABV basically means more water, means more water extraction. So the fun about extracting, and my advice would be to try this out. And there's a little anecdotal story there as well, is that some things actually extract better in water and some things extract better in alcohol. I think it was cinnamon aldehyde that extracts in...
a very high percentage alcohol. Cinnamaldehyde dissolves very good in ethanol and really bad in water.
So imagine that you do a water extraction, right, on cinnamon. You're going to show your staff like, this is going to be amazing. You use water, or you use a low percentage, like 20%. So you're basically distilling maybe at 40, 45. Now you don't get the results. So maybe go 40, 50% in your boiler, and then the extractor will be fed with 80%. Higher proof, more cinnamon extraction. And we did some amazing cinnamon extractions where basically we were able to process the cinnamon into a liquid, an extract, and then have people smell the wood that they thought was wood because it didn't look like cinnamon anymore. And they said, what is it? Do you smell anything? Most smelled nothing. A little bit maybe of sawdust kind of smell. And then we let them smell the liquids, and the liquids were where all the flavors were gone. And we then tried to explain to them that actually this is not wood, this was cinnamon after we extracted it. And that's how amazing extraction actually works.
Yep. Stefan had a problem. He made a peach extract on the mini extractor and it did not siphon off. So what went wrong? We can't tell by just this information, of course. Could be a lot of things. You already told us here you used springs in a tea bag at the bottom to make sure that it didn't clog up. Again, peaches, we've used them before as well. They can become very dense. Yeah. So you have to cut them very, very small to make sure that it doesn't become one big block. And if it becomes one big block, it takes a lot of time for all the alcohol and the water to seep through. So you say it didn't siphon off in 5 to 20 minutes. That actually makes sense. It would take a lot longer if it's a real dense peach in there. Yeah. But we need some more information to know exactly why it didn't siphon off. But you can also go to the website or to the iStill University where we actually show you how to use the extractor and take care of any problems that you can encounter with it.
Yeah, to add to that, I'm happy that you use the springs because the springs prevent the opening from clogging. But then again, the siphon works based on water pressure or liquid pressure, right? So there has to be a higher water column inside the extractor chamber relative to the siphon. That's what pushes it over. Now imagine that you use peaches and that they blur up and block the whole column or the whole chamber basically. Now you don't really get a liquid pressure enough on the siphon for it to actually overflow. So that's also something that happens quite often. Yep. I'm not saying that is the issue. Please know as a mindset that the extractors only leave our factories when they work perfectly. So it is, and that sounds, I don't mean that in any offensive way, but it is by definition an operator failure. Another thing you can do is if you pass the exams is become a member of the iStill University Facebook group and ask your question there because everybody has had issues like that. Nothing goes well on a first run because that's what learning is all about. But they might give you some other tips on what to do. Sometimes just pinching it once or twice sort of helps. And I'm not talking about your wife, but actually that little siphon back there. Yeah.
Another question from Robert on the extractor. Can you please explain the extractor more? That's a bit out of the scope of this question and answer because we're talking about gin most of the time now. But if you go back to the live stream we did in August, there we are using the extractor and in that video I'm explaining how it actually works, what the siphoning does.
Yeah, and actually to add to that, just today, just like 2 hours ago, just before we started this live stream, Christian added to the iStill trade show an extra button with workshops. And the first thing that we uploaded, so it's there, is basically the last live stream. Yes. So pretty soon you'll be able to see this live stream over there as well and some interviews you did with some other people. Yeah. But that's where you can find it. Go to iStill.com, go to the trade show, maybe register for it before you can enter it, and then you can see that movie for free.
Okay, we've got some questions about cooling, and if I see them correctly, something is happening in another building, I think. So, all right, I'll rephrase that or repeat that. Some questions about cooling. Do we use a cooling tower or what do we recommend as a cooling tower? Well, of course, the iStills have their own cooling system in there. So maybe if you want to walk over to the 200 and explain a little bit how it works.
That's a great idea. I'll just get over there.
And of course, our cameraman, he's running around like mad to do all this for us.
Yeah. So, you guys, I don't know if it's in the picture, but you saw the 100 already, right? So maybe if you can do a shot of the 100. That's the 100. That's what we're doing the gin on right now. And if you could come back to me, then I'll show you the 200, because that was one of the promises that I made you guys, right? We're not just going to talk about gin, even though it is like 98% of the time about gin. There were also a lot of questions like, wow, could you show us the new 1000 and the new 200? And the new 1000 is still under construction, the new 200 is ready. This is it, a slightly beefed up version of the 100, slightly bigger, slightly taller column, of course 200 liters of net capacity. But your question was, how do we cool it? Well, basically we use water or a glycol system, anything you like. You just connect it with a garden hose or with a dedicated tube that goes in here, cools the aftercooler, and then goes up and actually cools the column cooler. And that's all you need in order to run basically 100, a 500, a 2000 and a 5000. Maybe for a 5000 you need 2 taps because there's a lot of power going in, a lot of gases that need to be knocked down. If I listen to your question correctly, you say, what do you do with the cooling water? Do you use a cooling tower? And just to address your question to the maximum of its potential, a cooling tower is a way to recoup the energy, or at least release the energy from the cooling water. So in a way, I can interpret your question as being a technical one on what do we do with the cooling water when it becomes hot? Well, we dump it, but that's because water is in abundance here, right? In other countries and other places, you can't do that. And a cooling tower, formally a cooling tower, basically means that you have a separate system next to your still where you, like a shower, actually let your warm cooling water fall down with a vent that pulls up air in order to cool those droplets down and be able to recirculate and reuse your cooling water. We don't use it because we don't have to. We do not provide it because basically we feel that there's a lot of people out there, a lot of companies out there that provide nice chilling solutions, whether it's a cooling tower or a glycol system or anything in between.
Okay, so if you want to walk over to the 100 for me now.
Yeah.
Because there's a question again from Mark from Japan. Could you please touch it? The column.
Mark, who from Japan?
Mark.
All right. Hi Mark, I'm touching it.
Yeah, or the boiler. Yeah, because the question was how much heat does it give off when it's working. So I think we amply demonstrated that now.
Yeah, we like to create a safe working environment. And that basically means that by adding insulation, you create a more efficient process, less energy that sort of gets out of the system. We don't need to warm up the distilling hall. Even in the Netherlands, we don't need to. So basically, it's hand warm. It's probably 30, 35 degrees, even though the inside is 85 to 90 degrees, or 90 to 95 degrees. Now, it even goes here, right? This is 20, 23, 25 degrees, 20 degrees. It's all very cool. The only thing I don't want you to touch is this, right? Because this is the mantle. It's not insulated. All the vapors basically hit this. So this is going to be warm. But anything that's black or anything that's on the outside, you can basically touch quite easily.
So that's not in the stream, it's actually our neighbors doing something, I don't know what, but they're making a little bit of a noise. All right, another question on the extractor. After using the extractor, do you recommend adding extract or essences into the final gin run? So we have to explain a little bit the difference between an extract or an essence. When we do an extraction, we get all the flavors out of the botanical or the fruit that we're using. And of course, you can use that extract that has the color, has all the flavors from it, but you could also put that extractor back into your boiler, into your still, and distill it off. Then it turns into an essence. It's clearer again, it's a transparent liquid again, with the same qualities. It's even more concentrated. So it depends again on what you want to do with your gin. Of course, if you're going to add a lot of extract to your gin, it will get some, take on some color from that extract. So maybe you want to turn it into an essence and use that again. It depends on what you want to do. If you want to make a liqueur, for instance, I would always go with the extract itself because you have all the color, you have all the fruit sugars or other sugars that are in there. But if you want to have a clear gin, you just distill the extract again, turn it into an essence and put it into your gin. Let's see. You mentioned 30% before distillation. Is that the target or a function of what you want the alcohol level to be after distillation? No, that's what we start out with. There is 30% in the boilers. It will probably, because I think we're getting towards the end of the run on the Mini, and then we have our hard scud over here. We're already in Til's collection there, all right? We'll take some more time on the 100, of course. So this will probably be around 73, 74. Yeah. So we started out with 30%. We went to 73 or 74 during distillation. So that's what we start out with, is the 30%. I would like to extract flavors from liquids like fresh fruits from around the world. What would be the best way to extract flavor, for example, from passion fruit pulp to add to my gin? So Willem, want to answer that question?
Yeah. You have the peel of the fruit and you have the liquids inside of it. If you want to extract the flavor of the peel, then use a high percentage of alcohol. If you want to extract everything within the peel, everything within the fruit, then use a lower percentage. If you want both, then do a 50% alcohol in the boiler, so you get best of both worlds. So the part that can dissolve the polar and non-polar components, which means you can dissolve substances that dissolve in alcohol and substances that dissolve in water.
To add to that, please understand and realize that most of the flavors of fruits are concentrated in the peel, right? Yeah. I would almost say the word appeal comes from that, because the fruit wants to give off a scent to attract certain animals, beasts, humans, whatever, birds, that help them, well, put their seeds at other places, right? By offering something that's enjoyable, eatable, and rewarding. And any smell on the inside doesn't really attract anybody, because it's from the outside that you see it and smell it. So basically, that's why, as a rule of thumb, around 90% of the flavors you, as a human being, associate with a banana or with an orange are actually in the peel of that product.
Yeah. Patrick, your question was about the pulp. If you can get only the skins, it would be better. As what Odin said, skins have more flavor to it.
Yeah, and it's not just better because they have more flavor in them, they also have less water in them. So basically, if there's less water in, which is why we like in our gins to use dried peel, because dried peel and fresh peel, oh, fresh must be better, right? Yeah, because it's fresh. No, it isn't. It just has a higher water content. High water content translate to low flavor composition.
Exactly. All right. Maxime has a question. She has a problem. He or she has a problem with the 96% neutral alcohol. I always get quite a lot of tails and very few heads and hearts. Should I redistill it a few more times? I would say you need another supplier of GNS, but yeah, because the heads and tails that you are getting when you're making gin should be from the botanicals and not from the alcohol itself.
So the question was about the alcohol?
Yeah, the question, otherwise please rephrase the question in the chat, but the way I interpreted it is that when you are making gin, you get not much hearts and you have a lot of tailsy flavors. That could either be your botanicals, but if it's coming from the alcohol, then you don't have a clean alcohol to start with, and I would look for a different supplier of GNS, or if you're in the United States, NGS.
If it were gin making, you would get over tails flavors early on. You're probably distilling too fast, so on too high a power setting, especially if you are at higher altitude, because higher altitude means lower air pressure, means lower air resistance, means by definition higher vapor speed, so you get more tailsy flavors over during a run. But then again, if it's just a GNS, just a neutral alcohol, it should be good to start with.
Yeah. We have a question here about the efficiency of the stills from Nicholas. How much water or glycol as a cooling agent, I presume? Yeah. At what temperature and speed should I send to the iStill in order to get more time efficiency in my distillation, regardless my specific recipe? I think there's a lot of parameters there.
Cool, yeah. I think the first thing I want you to understand about our design, and we've got a little leaflet that you can order with Esther at istillmail.com, a little leaflet that explains how the machine works, where you can learn that basically cooling is recipe independent in an iStill, which is amazing. Cooling doesn't have an influence on the flavor, because I hate that, because cooling water has different temperatures, different pressures, and all kinds of other things that influence now your flavor profile. So we got rid of that, which is really good. We use tap water, so it's very easy. But the units are very, very energy efficient. So you need a lot of cooling water or a lot of glycol. Basically, they're about 90% efficient. So if you run an iStill 100, which has 5.8, around 6 kilowatt hours, and now all of a sudden you're running at 60%, so you're doing, let's say, 3.5 kilowatt hours. That basically means that your cooling capacity needs to be around 3.5 kilowatt hours. It's that easy. And can you achieve that with water? Yeah, no problem. We can run a 2000, which is like 20 times bigger than what we're running right now. And we can run it at 60-70% power just with a tap on. That's all you need. All right? But if you go to a chiller, if you go to somebody that actually tells you what kind of chiller you need, basically go to what power do I have on my iStill. If it's 18 kilowatts, 1/8 on a 500, go for an 18 kilowatt chiller. You'll be slightly above what you need, but better to be above it than below it.
Good. All right, I just asked Willem if he will do the measuring on the gin that we made there. So he's now looking at the ABV that we created with that 30%.
78.
78. So do we expect to see the same results on the 100?
Yeah.
Yeah. Of course, that's going to be busy for a while still.
Yeah, I don't think we'll make the end by the time that the Q&A finishes.
Right. So any more questions, guys? Because I think we've had them all. Oh, there's another one. That's from Robert. He is in Australia, craft distilling, and he loves our designs, and he has more questions, but he will email us. So looking forward to answer all your questions on the email, Robert. Please reach out to us.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it, all the way from Australia, right? So,
yeah.
Yeah.
What time is it over there?
Robert knows.
Robert knows, yeah. We don't. Okay, anything else you would like to show us about the 100 or the 200?
No, I think we gave a good impression of what the unit is capable of. I think you got another good impression of what the Mini is capable of in a really short period of time.
Yes.
Like one of the questions that I do get every now and then, and that might be worth investigating here as we're here live with you anyhow, is that sometimes people say like, yeah, but so why do the runs take more time, right? Why don't you make them faster? Well, we could make them faster. We can go full speed. It only takes half the time. But if you go faster, the result is higher vapor speeds. And if you go faster, the result is more smearing of tailsy flavors into your product, which is maybe not what you want in a gin, because a gin usually is pretty mouth forward. Why don't you make the boiler smaller? We can now do a 4-hour run or a 3-hour run, right? Instead of a 5 or 6 hours run. And my question in return is, why would we do that? Well, because many manufacturers of distillation equipment actually build it that way. Yeah, there's a reason why they do that I won't dive into right now, but basically if you're a craft distiller, it's your job to distill. And if it's your job to distill, why would you accept downtime? Like imagine that we do a 4-hour run only instead of a 6-hour run. 6-hour run, you fill it, you do the run, you clean it, you can go home, and you've made a lot of gin. If it were to take, let's say, only 3 hours, right, because we go half the boiler size, all of a sudden you have to fill it once, do a little run, be back again, clean it out, fill it again, heat it up again, do another run, clean it out. All of a sudden your downtime explodes. So for me that doesn't make sense. For me it makes sense to design a still in such a way that it sort of moves around a 7, 8 or 9 hour workday instead of around a 3-hour workday. Unless you only want to do 1 run a day, right? But then do 1 run every 2 days and you still end up with the same result. You don't even have to show up to work the next day anymore. It's a job, right? It's not, recipe development is different. That's why the Mini goes quicker.
Recipe development is actually more fun than the actual distilling.
It is, yeah. That's why we automated it.
Yeah.
It became boring to do those kind of runs every day. Just push a button and off you go.
Okay, another question. I've heard that botanical oils from a previous gin run can run into the heads of the next run. Is it good practice to clean out the iStill 100 before a fresh run and using the cleaning in place?
No. What happens is that at the end of a run, let's say we do gin and then we do gin again, the flavors that are left in in the machine are basically tailsy flavors. So you now get a little bit of potential tailsy flavor over in the next run. Traditionally what you need to do is clean out the machine, especially if you've got a copper still for gin. You need to really scrape it and clean it with a caustic to make sure that the rust formation inside the column gets polished away, so that those flavors go away. In a stainless steel still, because the material is much more chemically inert than copper, you basically flush it with water for 5 minutes and that's all you need to do. In our machines, we don't even have to do that because of the automation. What we programmed into the machine, and it's not something that we highlight or that we have as a option for you to choose, it basically does it automatically. So at the end of the run, we keep some tails alcohol in the machine, and at the beginning of the next run, they're automatically extracted and the whole still is cleaned with the first part of the heads faction that we don't use to start with. So we use the heads program as a cleaning program, we use the tails program basically as a sanitation program to make sure there stays alcohol inside the column so no algae growth, no insects can start to find their way in there and really screw up your run. So
yeah, that's probably one of the reasons why we do the tails collection like that instead of just stopping the run.
Yeah, and there's especially in a gin run, there's always quite some tails. And with the iStill, you can basically just put it back in the iStill on another run, and now choose the vodka program to get rid of the flavor. Now you recouped your otherwise lost GNS. Now for us, this is not a big issue because the GNS that we lose, we basically declare, and we don't have to pay tax over it. But I know in the UK, many customers have to prepay. Right, so you buy an IBC, you have to pay over 1,000 liters of alcohol, you have to pay your taxes. Now you want to collect your tails and rerun them and recoup the GNS, right? Because now it gets really expensive. So
if they're all on a rectifier's license, that's that's a lot of money. All right, Rodrigo from Chile. Thanks for all the answers. Is there any way or an ingredient to transfer sweetness to the final product, to get some sweetness into the gin?
That's not my question.
No, Willem is laughing here, he's smiling here, so he wants to give you the answer. And we'll see if it's the right answer.
We did an experiment with a gin, and there was something acidic taste to it. Yeah. And I did some research, and I found out that some components in licorice will transfer into sweetness, a sweet sensation in your mouth when you distill into the tails of a gin run. So if you wanted to taste sweeter, then licorice could be an option. Or at least we found out that way.
Yeah, licorice is an option. Don't use too much licorice because for some people it causes problems with their blood pressure. So be careful with too much licorice in your product. And of course there's always sugar. It's a very simple answer, probably not the answer you're looking for. But sugar gives you sweetness. And of course, if you add sugar to your gin, you become an Old Tom gin. That's the category of sweetened gins. And they're quite popular at the moment, especially in cocktails. Bradley is asking, are the old iStill screens able to be updated to the new ones? And if so, are there reasons to do so? That's a question for you.
Yeah, I'm afraid not. I mean, we made a huge leap like 4.5 years ago. Where our first generation, we had so many lessons learned that we felt we could and we should do a better job. And we basically had to sort of go to the drawing board again because the improvements in technology, but especially in build quality, are so huge that we basically wouldn't advise investing any money to try to upgrade your old iStill into a new one. It will be almost as expensive as buying a new one. And your base capacity will still be a boiler and a column that is relatively under-designed if you compare it to the potential that the next generation brings to the market.
All right. Another question. What's the advantage of direct versus indirect heaters in gin production? That's a good one.
I think it's a good one, yeah. I would have said that, well, if you would have asked me this question like 5 years ago, I would have said like, well, that's not really that important because with the direct heating or the indirect heating, you can create a bit more of Maillard reaction, which is mostly third dimensional, and gins usually are two dimensional, right? Front of mouth, middle of mouth. not so much the back-end flavors. But then again, more and more gins become more and more complex, and the Maillard reaction is a really great way to achieve that, right? Yeah. The sugar's already in the fruits or in the berries even, like limited amounts, but that's enough. That's all that you need. There's somebody coming in that actually wants to ask a live question.
Live question, or wants to buy a still, yeah. We don't sell them by the door, guys. You have to order them online.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So direct heating, and all of our systems are directly heated. We only use a variety that's directly heated, and the other one uses indirect heaters, but it still sits inside the mash. So one of the things that we've learned from a customer from New Jersey is that they went to indirect heating and agitation to create less of a Maillard reaction. And they immediately went back to the old heaters and no agitation, because they actually enjoyed the extra third dimension or beginning of a third dimension that the Maillard reaction gave them. So it's a choice. If you want to make a lighter style gin, if you want to make a gin that is going into your gin tonic 2-dimensional, I'd say indirect heaters and maybe even agitation. But if you go for a 2.5 dimensional gin with more character that can be consumed in itself, maybe go direct heating and no agitation.
Yep, yep. And another advantage, if you don't use the bags for your botanicals, it's far easier to clean up your still with indirect heaters.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, makes it a lot easier. Another question from Tokyo, and it's 10:30 in the evening there, I think. Yeah. And I think the question is gone. It was about chocolate, I think. Well, if you want to use chocolate in your gin or in your liqueur, use the extractor. Great way to get the chocolate flavor out.
Coffee flavor, same.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's back here again. Yeah. Maillard reaction, can you explain that into more detail to an engineer? Well, it's not a technical process, is it? It's a chemical process.
Yeah, it's basically a sugar browning reaction. So try to put some crystal sugar, white sugar in a pan on a fire, no oil, and just start to heating up and mix it, and you can see it get brown. You're creating caramel. And caramel is brown, it dissolves in alcohol, so it's a way to make your whiskey look browner, and that's what they actually do. And the good thing is that caramel doesn't give off a lot of flavor. Fun thing is that if you do the same reaction below 100 degrees, which is impossible with a pot on the fire or boiling it, but which is always possible in an iStill or in a still, because the boiling temperatures in the boiler are by definition lower than 100 degrees, right? Because there's alcohol mixed in with the water. So the boiling point is lower. All of a sudden you get a different browning reaction if there are some residual sugars left in your herbs, let's say in a gin, or in your grains if you make a whiskey, or in your molasses ferment if you make a rum. Those sugars will now trigger another browning reaction, which is called the Maillard reaction. It gets brown, and it creates 25% more flavor. So again, if a craft distiller is all about creating more flavors, better flavors, instead of the cheapest alcohol possible, the Maillard reaction is definitely something you want to investigate.
Yes, especially, well, not only with gin, but especially with whiskey and rum.
Whiskey and rum even more so, yeah.
All right, so I think we've answered all of the questions that we have at the moment. We've created the gin on the Mini. It's still running, of course, on the 100, so we have something to look forward to in the evening. Over here. So Willem has just, you diluted it to?
Yep, to 43%.
43%. And
okay.
So, thank you all for watching and participating in this stream. If you want to know more about the iStills and how they function, go to the Design Center on the website. If you want to know more about everything we've been doing here and how to become a craft distiller, how to make those great recipes, sign up for the online university course, and let us know if you want more of these Q&As and what next subjects should be. Just put it in the chat or in the comments on Facebook or YouTube. Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers, guys.